And we're on. Welcome to the Travel Massive live webinar about the tech and audio of podcasting. You might recognize my voice. I'm the voice of the Travel Massive podcast. I'm Kevin O'Shaughnessy. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the second in our series about how to get started in the world of podcasting, in particular travel podcasting. Travel Massive is a community of about 60,000 members. Many of them are content creators. So we've got quite a number of content creators in our community. And there has been a curiosity about, well, how do we go from the online world to the audio world? And these series of webinars, these shows that we're putting together, help our content creators get through all of the noise, all of the fluff around all of the bits and pieces to get going. To actually get to the creation part. Like I said, I'm Kevin O'Shaughnessy. I've been joined by three very special panelists today. I'll introduce them in a second. But first, I just want to say thank you to Rick Gazarian for giving me the kick up the butt that I needed to get this show together. I wouldn't have done it without you, Rick, so thank you very much for that. Rick is our chapter leader and my fellow podcast producer on the Travel Massive channel. So thanks very much, Rick, for doing that. Separately, we have just published about 11 new podcasts from the Travel Massive podcast. A lot of the back catalogue of the live show are now live, as well as some great new content from Rick Gazarian, some interviews that he's done over in Thailand. So there's some great stuff to tune into. So subscribe to that, of course, and as well as checking out all of our panelists as we go through. I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll bring everybody on for some of this. Before I go on, I'm going to be making some recommendations about audio podcasting gear. A deep, dark part of my past, I've been trained as a sound engineer. I'm not a good one, so I know my way around some of this stuff. I can bluff. I know what questions to ask, so hopefully I'll get the best out of the panelists today. But this is not a gear channel. If you see us making a recommendation about what microphone to use, it's just to help you get going as a creator. There are hundreds of reasons to choose different microphones or different recording equipment. This is really just our baseline as to what you should be using. So if you're firing up in the comment section, that's okay. Put in your recommendations, but please, we're only here to try and share our own experience, as well as, some better experience than my own from the last year of podcasting. I know Rick has shared some with me, and I've used them in the past. Palle and Ivo will be sharing some of their own recommendations on this episode as well. I'm going to get started. Joining me today, I've got three very, very special guests. I have, of course, Ivo Terra. He is from the Pontifications podcast. He's been going at this nearly as long as, dare I say, Ivo, Adam Curry in 2004. You were one of the early Podfather generation podcasters. You do work as a podcast consultant, and you are, of course, the author of Podcasting for Dummies. Palle, a Radio Vagabond podcast, This American Life grade of audio podcast there. Really enjoyed picking up on a couple of those the last week or so. Podcasting since about 2006, and you have a production company called Radio Guru. We've been joined by an old friend of mine, Paddy Jordan, who is not involved in the travel industry apart from helping me out. So all of the magic, all of the stuff that I've been able to apply over the last year or so running the Travel Massive podcast, Paddy's been my go-to guy for things about how to record, how to get the right gear, that kind of stuff. So he'll be joining us for a little while at the beginning to talk about some of the more mechanical parts of sound engineering from his own studio there. Paddy Jordan recording in the west of Ireland. Palle is in South Africa. Ivo is in Arizona, and I'm here in Dublin. We're all going to bring everybody on here together to talk a little bit about this. We'll share some of these slides afterwards. There were some great highlights in part one. Rick was a fantastic host, and he got some great comments out of the guys about how to get started. We're going to take those recommendations and try and apply them here. I'm going to put forward my 8 tips, or 8 things I wish I knew about podcasting before I started this last year for Travel Massive. I'm going to bring you all on, guys, here before we kick off. Palle, I want to just ask, when did your Radio Vagabond podcast start, by the way? Were you always doing that, or was this just something that you started on the road?
When I became a full-time traveler in the summer of 2016, that's when I started doing my podcast. started doing it in Danish, my mother tongue, and then I met so many people that said, "Oh, please do it in English." So then I switched at some point to doing it only in English, but I missed doing it in Danish. So now I'm doing both. I'm doing two versions now.
So you've got a travel podcast in the two languages. There's something there.
Yeah.
Ivo, you've been at this a long time. I did compare you to Adam Curry. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just I happened to be catching him on there with Joe Rogan recently. How many podcasts have you put together, have you started or co-produced in your time?
I have been a voice on 19 different podcasts over the last 16 years. Yeah, 19, and 5 of which are semi-active today. And then if you go to how many I've actually been involved with, it's well over 1,000, because I used to run a very large network of podcasters helping independent authors release their books as podcast form, kind of a serialized audiobook. So cool. A lot is the short answer to that.
Wow, that's incredible. 1,000 is one hell of a number to meet. Paddy, just to get you going there, because I'm going to jump into a quick demo with you first. You're joining us from the west of Ireland, of course, in your own studio there in the background. You do have quite a fantastic backdrop there around you. You've been recording this afternoon, and you're getting going with your own kind of broadcast studio for musicians. How's that going?
It's going well. It's a little bit difficult with the social distancing, but luckily I have a few separate microphones, and we were able to keep people apart. But a bit of a challenge.
Well, look, if it gets more musicians online during these strange times, I think that's a good thing. So fair play with that. I did want to start, and I put these forward as points of criticism. These are just things I wish I knew. And Paddy, like I said, you've been a star, kind of keeping me sane over the last couple of years. I want to talk a little bit, just jump into a little bit about microphones, because this can be a huge distraction for first-time podcasters. It only takes 15 minutes on Thomann before you realize that you're about 2,000 microphones on there. I've no idea how many they have, but there's just so much. Where do I start? What can I do? I thought maybe we'd go into a little bit of this with you first. You've got what the folks can't see at home is just under the webcam is an array of audio gear. You've got a couple of mics you want to show us. Can you maybe give us a quick demo of what kind of different mics there are, just so we can get a feel for the shape and format of them?
Yeah, well, very quickly, when you're recording at home or you're podcasting at home, you have the option of using something like this, which is an SM7B from Shure. Mm-hmm. That's Evo, I see, has one as well, which is a good sign.
So do I.
Yeah. All right. Very good. They're a very reliable microphone. They don't pick up too much of the room sound, so you have a nice proximity effect and not too much echo and resonance from the room.
So that means that, in plain terms, Paddy, that means that, when you hear the room, it means that, if somebody's walking around or if there's anything happening, more than 2 feet away from the microphone, that could be very pronounced depending on the kind of microphone you're using, right?
It can be distracting, actually, yeah. And also it's not just if there's other noises in the room, but just the actual sound of the room itself, the rings and the resonances and the reverb from the room can be quite distracting. So it's probably a good idea when you're podcasting or doing online videos or anything to try and minimize the amount of room echo and room sound as much as possible. It makes for a more intimate experience with the listener, I guess.
Okay, and microphone is one way. Is there any other tips that you'd have for a beginner?
There's sound treatment. Now, I mean, in a studio like this, you have to have quite an array of expensive sound treatment. If you're doing a podcast, it's not essential that you invest in the really fancy stuff, but you can always put a curtain or a duvet and behind the microphone or behind you, and it'll absorb some of that boxy sound that you hear in a small room.
I think one of the things that you could do is to just, when you sit into a room for the first time, and it's hard to actively listen when you're the one talking as well. What I like to do is to just give one clean clap. If you can hear just the clap, that means that you're probably in a decent space in terms of treatment. But if you can hear a snap that goes with it, a very loud ringing sound, that means that you're picking up quite a lot of room around you as well.
Flutter echoes. I don't want to go too technical, but when you hear a ring from a clap like that, it's called a flutter echo, which is the sound bouncing off one wall, hitting the other one, hitting the other one, hitting the other one, until it decays. That's a disaster for sound, yeah, because it really makes it makes it more difficult to listen to a person's voice for a long period of time when there are flutter echoes and resonances in the room. So to try to minimize that by putting soft materials around the room, and particularly behind your head, which is exactly in front of the microphone. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I've picked up over the time I've been doing this is just this, what we're looking at here in front of me, and what it seems everybody has. Evo has one there. I have one. You've got one plugged into your SM7 as well, Paddy. Is this little rig that it's connected to? Just the position of your microphone is a huge change, no matter what you're using. So to have it at the right spot, this is a €12 piece of gear, just to get the microphone in the right place. That can make a difference, right?
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, you don't want a microphone just resting someplace on a desk where it could fall, or it just has it doesn't give you the option to move it close to your mouth and to be able to pick up all the dialogue. Okay. So yeah, it's a microphone stand, whether it's a boom arm like you have, or a separate stand on the ground like I have here, or that's essential piece of gear.
Now, we've gotten used to the sound of your voice at this stage. Can you show us around another couple of microphones, please? There.
Okay. Well,
so that's the SM7, and
that's the SM7. It's reliable. I highly recommend it. It's a great microphone. It's a dynamic microphone. The only problem with it is you need a lot of gain on your preamp. Now, I'm not sure if people know what a preamp is, but it's a little amplifier that brings the level of the microphone here up high enough for the computer to deal with it. The voltage of the signal. Okay. But you need a preamplifier that's able to give you a lot of gain in order to run these. So that's important.
Thinking about that chain, you've got a microphone, you've got something that it's plugged into an amplifier, a preamp. You might have an interface. Those two might be the same thing, and then that plugs into your computer for recording. The diagram we showed there on the slide, you've got various different combinations of it. Your Zoom recorder does all four. This microphone that I'm using does 3 out of the 4. It does the microphone, the preamp, and the interface. And I've just got a USB cable going into the computer at this stage. It's becoming quite popular. But you're saying there that the SM7, it needs something between it and the computer, and that's extra tech that you mightn't necessarily think of up front.
The preamp, or the preamp that's incorporated into the audio interface. Yeah, you need that, and you need a reasonably good one. Yeah.
Okay. On your shirt there, then you've got a cute little. I love that. It's if I'm not mistaken, it's the Rode
the
Wireless Go.
Yeah, I'll switch over to that. Hold on. So I'm on the Wireless Go now. You can see the quality isn't quite as good. But it's a super little piece of kit, and as Palle was saying earlier that you want to do a lot of the podcasting in situ. Something like this is absolutely fantastic. So I have to get myself in the mirror. So it's on the other side of my, it's clipped onto my T-shirt there. It's got an omnidirectional microphone, which means it picks up all the space at 360 degrees all the way around. And it's battery run, so.
And it's two parts. So there's a bit on your shirt there. There's a bit that sits then next to the computer.
Microphone and
you
transmitter.
Don't need a preamp. It just goes straight into whatever your iPod, or sorry, your iPhone for recording.
Unfortunately, you do need. That's the receiver, and you do need a preamp because.
You do need a preamp. Okay.
Yes, the output of the Rode Wireless Go is what they call at mic level. It's not at line level, so you have to put it through a preamp in order to get it up to line level. I made that mistake myself when I bought it first. Actually, I plugged it straight into my console and was surprised. I thought it didn't work.
Thinking back to all the gear reviews I've seen for it, that comes with a little connector on the Go itself where you can plug in a lavalier microphone, the little clip-on microphones that you'd attach to your shirt. And that gives you a little bit more flexibility. So you can just schlep that onto somebody, they're good to go, but you can also plug in something a little bit more advanced, like one of these lavalier microphones. That's the kind of thing that you'd see on TV, on the newscasters. It's the common, very, very close proximity microphone. Is that an omnidirectional microphone as well, Paddy? The lavalier.
Yes, you can get various types, but this one that I just showed you there is omnidirectional. Yeah. It's
okay. Now you've got one more.
These are great for traveling when you're in the field. These are great for when you're in the field, and you can get mounting accessories to mount it to an iPhone, or you can mount it directly onto the shoe of your webcam. You got a little camcorder here. You can mount it directly onto that. It's fantastic.
It's good for keeping everything a little bit tidy. There's one more microphone for comparison, I think. In the background there. We'll switch over.
Yeah, I'm just going to switch over. The next one I'm going to hear is a Neumann. Now this is, because I'm in an audio studio, this is a very high quality microphone. You're talking about upwards of €2,000 to buy one of these. So not everybody doing podcasts or that is going to need that level of quality. But if at some stage you do want to jump up to that, I would recommend a Neumann. I'll just give you a listen. I'll have to wheel back a little bit. All right, can you hear me there?
Oh wow.
Yeah, so that's the Neumann.
We did this last night, and you blew me away with the sound quality. Just to hear the night and day of it. This is just to give a baseline of this. This is crazy quality. Okay, so this isn't for everyone, but you can hear the color and the voice straight away.
Yeah, I mean, and you can lower your voice and just it feels a lot more relaxed. You don't have to really project it or anything, because even if you go down into the lower registers, it'll still pick up. You see a lot of these in radio studios as well. I think Howard Stern uses one of these. It's kind of like, you get a lot of the nuance of the voice is going to come through in it, and I think that helps a little bit when you want to express emotions. If you can hear the nuance of it. That's why we have it in a musical setting. It's very important that you can sense the singer's emotions when they're singing music. So I don't think it's that much different when you're actually speaking. If you need to express emotions in a podcast, a good microphone will help. Yep.
That's a very clinical kind of setup there. I want to bring in everybody for a couple of opinions on that. That's a very clinical kind of a microphone. It's way out of most people's budget, to be honest. But just to hear the scale between, I love the SM7. It sounds fantastic. I think everybody would agree it's a great bass microphone. This is a €50 microphone that I've had for 10 years. I've just got it attached to this rig. I think it's okay, but it has its weaknesses. I think it matters more about how you use it. Palle, in the field, how wild can it get, and what do you really need to get going when you're recording out and about?
Well, I'm using the Zoom H6 for when I'm out in the field. I had the 4 before, and then I had the 5. And then I switched to the 6 because it also has the opportunity I can plug in 4 microphones. And it's obviously recording in stereo, but I use this windbreaker that I put on. And then I actually use it for interviews as well. Just sit with it like this and swing it back and forth, even though it's a little bit clunky. But it has a great sound even for that, I think. It's not what it's built for, I think, but I use it for that. And one of the reasons is that when I do the travel episodes, interviews, it's a lot of the times on the street corner, in a cafe, or out in nature, and I like to have it recorded in stereo, so I get the sound of something going on. There are people speaking in a funny language over here, or there's a dog over here. So yeah, I get the sense of that you're really in a space. So that's why I use this for field recording.
It's a great all-rounder, and they have Zoom have a recorder at every price point, from the 1, I think there's a 2, a 4, a 6. They've got all kinds of price
and then I also have the smallest one when I'm not sure if I'm going to be recording something, but I just slip this in my shirt pocket as I go out. And in fact, when I was in Sri Lanka recently, a lot of people asked me what kind of gear do I use. So I took these 2 out. I had this one on the little one, and then I was in Sri Lanka, and I went out with the tuk-tuks in the background and doing a side-by-side comparison of the 2, and put the video on my YouTube channel if you want to check out the difference between the 2 microphones. You can hear the difference, but it's not that much. This is pretty good.
It's a good starting point, and you get that texture in stereo, like you said. Ivo, you wanted to come in.
I do. The great thing about these Zoom recorders, the Zoom H4, I can verify these are monkey proof. This particular unit, if I get really, really close, you can see a little bit of scoring on the side of it. This was kidnapped by a monkey in far western Thailand and held hostage until I chased the monkey away, and it still works.
What was it recording?
Well, I was trying to record the sounds of monkeys in this swamp, and it turns out longtail or crab-eating macaques don't make any sound. So it wasn't very good. But there is a little bit of sound of this as he was chewing on it. So I left it out, walked away, looked back and said, why has the monkey got something shiny in his hand? Oh my God, that's my H4. So,
look, something worth mentioning is, that's a great device as well, Evo. I know you've got something like that. I think you've got the 6, but it's in the same family. You're using that as your preamp for your microphone, isn't that right? So between you and and your computer is a Zoom box of some sort that's powering the SM7, right? So
exactly right. I do have this little thing. It's a FET head, which gives it the gain that it needs because, as Paddy correctly stated, and Palle has correctly stated, this microphone is gain hungry. When I'm using a Shure SM58, which is the most indestructible microphone on the planet, I also traveled around the world with this device. I don't need the extra gain because this is not a gain hungry microphone. And this is perfect because also, if you ever need to pound a nail into something, here's a hammer.
That is the rock and roll star stand-up comedian boilerplate microphone. It is monkey proof, but maybe we'll find that on somebody else's YouTube channel, Evo. I wanted to share my own setup here just for a couple of notes and to kind of steer this a little bit. But what I've been using here, like I said, I'm using a $12 piece of gear to keep me going with this, like I said, age-old ancient microphone here. It's been going for about 10 years, I know, and then this is just the rig that helps me use it better. It used to be sitting here on the desk. It doesn't sound very good. Out and about, I use an iPhone or an iPad as the recorder, and I plug in this little thing. People don't know that an iPhone is mono when it's recording. That caught me by surprise in the last year. I wish I was a little bit more attentive in class, whatever, but only one channel can get recorded on an iPhone. This little piece of kit from Rode makes it 2-channel, and I can plug anything up to 4 mics in using these iRig microphones. These are lavalier microphones. That's what we've used in the Dublin Travel Massive meetups. We wire up people with those microphones and record them on whatever recorder I've got handy, my iPhone, my iPad, whatever. But it goes in multi-channel that way. And that kind of principle we'll talk about in a second, but that's my standard piece of kit. And most of that you can either buy secondhand on Reverb or get it up and running very, very cost effectively. I think even Rode have a kit for those microphones. You don't have to spend a fortune, and you can get up and running pretty quickly for most situations, whether it's a monologue style podcast or an interview style podcast. You can be up and running pretty quickly. But I think between your previous comments, Palle, but just having the Rode with the windbreaker on it and just being able to rock it back and forth, I think you're into good territory there for most situations. So it can be as varied and as colored as you like, but this is my setup. I would swear by it. Evo's setup is, we have a little bit on that in a couple of slides, but you can really spend a long time fussing around. This is what I recommend, just, and it gets you going for something like interviewing. Any thoughts on that, guys? I mean, I'm forwarding this as maybe a template for folks to use if they're in any doubt, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll say I think you sound great, Kev. I know you've got a velvet voice and all that as well, but the microphone sounds fantastic. So you can't fault that for your situation where you're just doing a presentation and it's just one person. But if you bring more people into the mix and you have to do interviews or whatever, you need more microphones, and you need to consider what functions they have.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a lot, and knowing exactly what you're doing, I suppose, helps you do it, and maybe not thinking of it as a checklist is one way. I'll consider it an endorsement. We're not a gear site, but just to give a vote, if anything, towards one solution. That's what's gotten me out of an awful lot of trouble in the past. Ivo, I do want to call out your own gear list. You've got something on your podcast Pontifications website. You brought this together in response to a tweet. Somebody kind of challenged you to, listen, just list out the best gear that we should get started with. You mentioned, I think the only thing I had any doubt over was the headphones, and that's only, a niggling point. I think it's a great list for anybody that's keen to get started. It's a progressive build, though. This isn't something that you should be going out as a checklist. This is something that you can build bit by bit as you need it, right? That's not something that you need to start off with day one. You can start recording just by pulling out your iPhone.
That's exactly right. I mean, I have on my table, I grabbed 10 different microphones that I have. 10. And one of them is my iPhone. The other one is my the AirPods, right? They come with it, right? These are 2, but then there's all sorts of other little gear around here. But my list is really designed for people who want to have a sit at home and make a great quality podcast gear. Nothing really in my list, with the exception of I do list the Zoom H6, is really designed for traveling around. I also list the 58s, which are indestructible, great for traveling around. But really, my answer to every time somebody says, what microphone should I use? I always tell them the best microphone is the one that you have and know how to use correctly.
It's what you'd say to a photographer, or you might hear from a photographer talking about what is the best camera. It's the one that you have when the moment arises. It's the one,
and you know how to use it correctly. I mean, that's exactly the kicker. I mean, a lot of people go out and buy the Yeti, right, which is the upgrade to the snowball microphone that you and I both here have, Kevin, right? So the Yeti, and they put it in front of the table and they talk into the top of it like it's a top microphone, and it's not. Or they put it in the middle of the room and they shout out it from across the stage. There's just that's not using it properly. So whatever microphone you have, even if it's your phone, just know how it's sounding and use it the best way you possibly can.
Palle, would you recommend anything else? Because I'm completely sold on the idea of the Zoom plus the fluffy windbreaker on top of it. Is there anything else you'd recommend for somebody doing the on the spot interviews like you've done? Is there any other stuff that you'd need to worry about, or is there a more cost effective way of doing it? Maybe.
I have had another one that I actually used on my phone to record in stereo. So what you're saying about it doesn't record in stereo, I don't understand that. It's a small Shure microphone that goes in with the iPhone plug, and it records in stereo. And I remember I was standing in an Apple store in Tokyo and said to this guy, because is it really worth the money? And he said, can I try it? And he said, no, you have to buy it, but we have money back guarantee. So buy it, test it, and if you don't like it, give it back. So I bought it, and I did a small test with just me speaking into the phone, and then I plugged it in and then recorded again, and it blew me away. The sound quality was so good. It's a Shure microphone, 150 euros, I think. M8 something. I don't remember because I lost it. It's so small that I lost it, and then I bought another one and lost it before I even used it for the first time. But it's a good quality thing. One thing that I do have bought recently is a lavalier microphone to put into my Zoom recorder, because it can record 4 lines in, so I could technically have 4 people and then still have recorded the sound effect, the stereo sound at the same time. I haven't tried using it yet, but I because then the Corona came and I haven't had an opportunity. But it's something I want to play with. Do people that I'm interviewing who are not used to being interviewed, are they getting more relaxed when I'm doing the interview and not thinking about having something stuck in their
gear to have in front of somebody?
Some people, if it's just something that I clip this on and then we record. So I'm going to try that.
Go over a couple of other recording tips. I've picked these up from Paddy Jordan over the last year. Like I said, one of the things that I think is easy to miss, so using the microphone correctly, mic technique, making the best of what you have. and just progressively upgrading is, I think, the message there. But I came up with these three little nuggets about how to record from it must be 20 recordings I've done for the podcast just over the last year, plus everything on the live show. It's to trust but verify. So when you are in a situation and you're about to go out, to your point, Ivo, it's the one that you know how to use. Trust but verify. So stop the recording, rewind a little bit, make sure it's actually picking something up. If you're doing sort of a live recording like what we do here, we come on a few minutes beforehand to listen in to make sure everything is working. So we do have, a sense of verifying that everything's okay. Trust but verify. Stop, rewind, press play, get a little sense of what's happening. And something, Paddy, if you want to kind of explain this one, fix it later. Like Palle was talking about recording multiple things at the same time using the features on his Zoom. And it's one of the things that stood out from your advice to me over the last year. It's try and record everything as purely as possible. Don't abuse it too much at the source of recording, and then you'll be able to fix it later on. Can you explain to folks what's actually going on there in the background? What's the tech behind that, or what's the reason you might do that?
Well, I suppose so far we've been talking about hardware, haven't we? We've been talking about microphones and audio interfaces and all this. We haven't mentioned software that you might have on your computer for post or for editing and for mixing the sound at a later stage. So what I use is obviously, because I'm in the music side of things, I use what's called a digital audio workstation, and it's from Apple, called Logic Pro. So if I can record each source on an individual track, and then I can bring it back into Logic when I get home, and I can vary the levels of the tracks, and I can edit any problems or take out any clunks or sounds or anything that I don't want in there. So it's very handy in that respect, in this that even if there's something that happens on site when you're doing an interview or you're doing a live podcast out of the studio, you can edit it later. Now I know you use different editing software, Kev, don't you?
I'm on at the moment. I didn't always use it, but at the moment I use Audition from Adobe. We'll go around the houses on what we should use in a second, I suppose. But for me, I try and keep everything separate as possible. So the thing I plug into the iPhone for recording, it can get two sources, and with the microphones doubled up, I can get different people talking on different channels. Then I try and mic people up so that the person who's likely to talk at the same time as somebody else won't be on the same channel. But I'm only kind of juggling there. For me, I've fixed so many problems just by that. Somebody sneezes while somebody's making the point of their lives on a recording. I'll never be able to catch it again. And because I can mute the sneeze or the cough or somebody dropping something, I've kind of saved the recording. Now, there's ways you can kind of fiddle with that in most audio software today, but it's not the same as being able to just cut out the cough, So I've kind of treated that as gospel ever since you told me. I've always kept the audio separate so that when I need to fix it, I can. It takes a bit of work, but it can be fixed. It mightn't be in everybody's comfort zone, but at least when it's there, you can kind of treat it separately. I know when Rick... go ahead.
Sorry, we are specifically talking about situations where there are more than one audio source now, So we're not talking about somebody sitting at home making a podcast on their own. In that situation, it's much more straightforward. But if you have several audio sources, for instance, like Palle was saying, if you want to capture the street noise but also an interview, then you have a stereo signal, which is the street noise, and you have the host of the interview and the person who's being interviewed. You have four sources, and you're going to want to bring those back home and get the levels right so that you can hear the street noise, but it's not too loud. One person is talking a little bit softer than the other one, so you have to bring that level up a little bit so you can hear them both at the same level. So, and that's where editing software becomes important, and it adds a certain amount of professionalism to a podcast where there are multiple audio sources.
We have a question. I'm going to bring up the audio workstation point here. One of the staples, maybe for the last 10, 15 years of open source audio editing, is a package called Audacity. I used to use it. I think it's fine. But one of the questions that came in is, how terrible is Audacity for editing audio? I don't edit that much, so when I do, Audacity gets downloaded. What should folks use for editing audio? Should folks edit audio anyway? But what can we do to chop and change, remove sections, take out the sneeze, whatever they need to do from audio once it's in? What should you use on your Mac or PC to make those edits? Anybody? Evo, if you want to jump in first.
Sure. So for one of the questions that came up there, Kevin, yes, you should always edit. Always. End of story. Always edit. I don't care how much editing you do. That's up to you. But you should always edit. You should always edit. Is that clear? You should always edit. Okay.
I said we'd be opinionated. I like that. Keep going.
With that out of the way, Audacity just celebrated its 20th birthday.
Wow.
20 years of Audacity.
It has come a long way. It used to be...
Audacity is great.
It's actually fully featured, right?
Look, Audacity does everything normal people need it to do. I started using Audacity in 2004 because prior to that, I was using 4-track reel-to-reel machines. I have literally, as I'm sure Paddy will say the same thing, I know Palle as well, I have literally cut tape. I have literally pasted tape together on magnetic, 1/4-inch strips, right? And so we were doing a lot of bounce downs on stuff like that. So when Audacity, when I discovered that again in 2004, it's like, well, why would I want to do anything else? So Audacity is a great tool. There's really nothing wrong with Audacity. It does what it needs to do. Now, when you get more advanced and you want to do things faster, more efficiently, that's when you upgrade your digital audio workstation or your DAW. I use Hindenburg Journalist Pro. It's an amazing tool to do exactly what I need it to do. It's not fully featured audio editing software. You wouldn't want to be making music with this software. It's designed to make podcasts and make journalistic style radio stories. It's what it does, and I think it works great.
Palle, do you want to come in on that? Where do you start? Actually, is this a sit down with a YouTube channel, get used to audio editing? Where do you start on this, and what do you recommend for folks to edit the recording?
I'm with Evo on this. Actually, a small backstory. When Evo and we met 4 years ago in Manila for the first time, we were competing on who started first, because I started my first podcast in 2006, so I was a late mover. But then we went into. But when did you get into radio? And I started in radio in '85, so I think I beat you on a hair there. So I've been editing. I've been editing with tape also, and it was so when we cut out something, I draped it around my neck because I might be using this clip later, and then what was on this, and so it was a completely different thing. Being a radio producer, I have a fully licensed license to Pro Tools. So with all the plugins, so I have all the state-of-the-art editing. But the thing with Pro Tools is that it can do so much that I don't need when I do my podcast. So actually, I started using Hindenburg for my podcast because I can work faster on it. It's not built for technicians. It's built for journalists who are not engineers. So that's why it's good if you're a starter.
Can you remember?
Made in Copenhagen.
Look, it's 25 years maybe that I've been goofing around one way or another with digital audio. A long time. I can't remember. Well, maybe I could kind of hark back, but I can't remember what it was like to use the SoundForge for the first time. I remember when it came out, it was a big deal, but I can't remember what it was like to learn sound editing. Like, is this something you should just kind of jump in, give it a go, or do you pay somebody to edit for you? Do you try and take a course and do it yourself? For the content creators that might be watching, what should they do?
Yeah. I have clients in my production company that I'm helping start a podcast as well, and I'm working with 2 right now. They have no experience whatsoever in editing audio, but they want to do it themselves, and I think that's a great way to go. So I'm helping them out in the beginning. I'm bringing in somebody to do a training day with them. especially if you have a little bit of background in editing video, if you have been using iMovie or something similar or Premiere, it's a stepping stone to getting into audio editing, and absolutely everyone can learn how to do it. I don't know if you guys would agree.
Paddy, maybe the last word on that. I want to bring you in. I know you're a little bit tight for time, but is there something that where can somebody start? Is it just jump in and hope for the best, or?
Yeah, look, if you've got a Macintosh, you've got GarageBand on there for free, and Audacity can be downloaded as Ian was saying in the comments. There's no reason why you can't get started. You can get started for free, and there is a multitude of videos out there on YouTube to help you get started. Just Google it and go for it. Like Ivo was saying earlier on, just jump in and get it done. Do it. Don't be waiting until you have the perfect software or the perfect mic jump in and get it done. Get moving. Get creating content. The earlier you start, the better you're going to be. So just get moving.
I'm going to jump into something quickly here because we're only on point 2 of 8, and I know some of them will go quickly. I get this question every once in a while. What formats should folks use? That's what we use for the Travel Massive podcast. The correct answer to mono or stereo is mono, unless you're doing something like Palle, I think, where you do want to pick up the texture, where there is actual maybe musical content that you want to put out there. But 9 times out of 10, you don't need mono. And I think, Palle, you kind of covered that already, that the texture and the environment really come through in stereo. There is no amount of debate that comes short on this. I hear some early starters talking about 24-bit audio. It's like there's some really cool stuff happening around this for dynamic range and stuff like that for digital. But no, 9 times out of 10, Common or Garden, podcaster grade audio. Keep Wave or other uncompressed audio if you can. And then when you're publishing it, it goes out as MP3. I don't know if there's anything I've fallen into a trap on there, Ivo and Palle. Is there something that we shouldn't say about that? I just like to just put that out there, say, screw it, there's 25 different ways of doing this. Just do it this way and hope that covers most bases.
You want to go, Palle? You want me to go?
I can do it briefly. Then you can add so much more. When I'm producing radio commercials and stuff that needs to go on the air, and I have to deliver an MP3, I'm saving it as a 256. But for the podcast, and I did that for my podcast because this is my baby and it should sound the best that it possibly can. So I saved that in the 256 too, until I realized it is really not necessary. So now I'm putting it out in 128 in stereo. Go, and then 14 LUFS. Go, Ivo.
Using 14 LUFS. Okay, so 16 LUFS is the standard. 14 is a little bit louder than that, but it's fine. You can. I'll allow 14. You know what you're doing. That's perfectly fine. So yeah, and LUFS is a measure of perceived volume. It's not a loudness. It's not a normalization. It's not a maximization. It's perceived loudness. And the great thing about the new version of Audacity, or all the tools that we talked about previously, is you can now export your MP3 files at -16 LUFS, which means that your podcast and my podcast episodes and everybody else's podcast episodes, except for Palle's, will all be the same volume. His will be slightly louder.
I'm a little bit louder.
It's a little bit louder than ours. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing to do. And I'm with Palle. There's no reason to go mono. Zero reason to go mono. Let me repeat that. Zero reason to go mono. It doesn't make your files any smaller in MP3. It does not make your files any smaller in MP3. The only thing that impacts file size in MP3 is the bit rate. 128 bits per second. That's what it literally means. So you can do that in joint stereo, which you should do, especially if you have any musical elements or sound elements out there. Zero reason to go mono.
Okay, that's interesting. So yeah. I think the format does allow us a little bit of margin there. Joint stereo is part of the technical part of it there. Paddy, I know you have to go. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just want to jump in on that last point from Ivo. He's absolutely correct on the output. There's no reason to have a mono output. There is a question about whether you record in stereo or in mono. I would suggest that when you're recording dialogue, or when you're recording just a vocal, sorry, I'm still stuck in audio, dialogue, you record in mono. So a mono mic to a person's mouth when they're speaking. But a stereo mic when you're recording ambience, if you want to record street sounds or anything like that, or when you're recording music. But always output in stereo.
Brilliant.
Okay, thanks very much.
That settles it. So we'll update the notes before we publish them. Appreciate that. And Paddy, thank you for joining us so far
Paddy.
on this special edition.
Thanks,
I've learned so much from you over the last year, so really appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Lovely.
Now, I have a couple of other things to go through. I think, Palle, you might have an opinion on this next point. Something that has saved my butt so many times, especially when I'm recording live, is the idea of a safety track. I know the Zoom has them built in, especially on the more advanced ones. But what I mean by this is that when I'm recording somebody, whatever setup I have, if I'm wiring up lav mics or whatever, and I've got everything kind of coming in through the sound desk or whatever I'm doing, I'll still have something else there recording the session in the middle of the table or something. It could be an iPhone. It could be, in my case, I use a Zoom just for that. I was really keen to share this one because that has saved my butt for at least 3 recordings that I've done over the last year. And you mightn't think it, but it's something that you can learn either by experience or somebody tells you. Are there any other tricks or any comments on that about from your own experience recording live, guys? Maybe Palle first, then Ivo.
I do this. No, I know that in the beginning I had this set up to have the safety track, but it just ended up crowding up everything. So I stopped. I turned off that functionality, and I keep my fingers crossed when I do something and try to do the best I can. But I have done great interviews where I forgot to put the button where I just didn't record. So I have done that, but no safety.
I'm a similar way. I like the idea of a safety track if I'm doing something where I'm not in control of the situation. And by that, I mean a situation like this. We're using the internet and my internet could drop. Anybody's internet could drop and we would lose a signal right there. So in that, for those sorts of things, having a safety backup is not a bad idea at all. I like the concept. But when I'm out in the field capturing content, the reason I don't worry about it too much, and like Palle, I've forgotten to hit record. Obviously, that's more than once that I've done that. But the reason I wear headphones with every single thing that I record is so that I know exactly what's happening. I know exactly what it sounds like. And so if there's a drop or if there's some horrible noise in the background or some other problems, barring, an SD card failing on me, I'm going to know when it actually is happening. So it's less of a concern for me. I've certainly had problems, but they've been few and far between.
A question come in from Andrew Jernigan here. What is your biggest tip for being a good guest on podcasts? And I'll move into interviews in a second off this. Should the guest ideally have a microphone if appearing on podcasts very often? That's the question. Ivo, take it there and back to Palle after.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to not. I mean, if you know you're going to be on, if you want to be a guest, you will. Let me change the way I say this. I often sound better than the podcast hosts who interview me. Because I'm using this, and I see people all the time when I'm doing interviews with people who are less skilled at this, who are not quite as dedicated to having good quality sound from the entire prospect. So I don't say always, but I quite often sound better than the hosts who are interviewing me. Yeah, if you are going to be on a podcast, if you want to be on a Zoom webinar, anything like that, go grab yourself a good quality microphone that easily fits into your bag. I used to say the Samsung Q2U was a great mic to use, but those are unavailable now. But whatever, just have a relatively inexpensive microphone that you know how to use, and you will sound better than most of the people that are also going to be interviewed by that podcast.
Palle, anything to add to that? Because I have a few very strong opinions on this.
And actually, it's a bit embarrassing. Here you are with in your great microphones, and I have the sampling cue to you. I bought it before it was impossible to get, and we tested it before we went live, and we couldn't get it to sound decent. So now I'm on a Bose headset, which is not the best thing. No, definitely. If you're being a guest, get a some kind of USB microphone. The Rode NT USB Mini is also decent. It's $100, and I just finished a big project with Lego where we had to do a lot of interviews. So we were using Zencaster, and instead of them just being on a headset or into their computer, I bought these Rode microphones and sent them to Los Angeles and New York and London and all over the place. And that made the sound not studio quality, but definitely better than if they were just on a headset. So yeah, it's a small investment, and you will make your sound good.
Well, another thing I think we should point out, when we're broadcasting at the moment through, I'll call it a domestic or a consumer style service. It's called StreamYard. We're big fans of it here at Travel Massive. We're putting out a lot of great content with it. We're building on top of it. But this is, domestic software. We're going through a web browser on it. We're not doing anything technical. And Palle, you're coming through on your microphone. I'm using mine, and Ivo's using his. And it's one of the things that we do, and it's the same would apply for Zencaster and Squadcast. It's something that we've done on the live show. We always insist on people using a wired mic, because somehow the psychology of using the laptop microphone, people go into speakerphone mode and they start shouting. And you get this half duplex effect when or noise cancellation kicks in. You can only have a one-way conversation. And when you're recording live and you just missed a question because somebody didn't hear it, or they're talking over one another, having your earpiece and your microphone separate can happen on every type of software. Zoom does it on their desktop app. We can do it here in StreamYard. Most Google Meet, you can put your microphone, your fancy microphone, whatever you can afford. This is a USB mic. I can put that in separate, and I'm listening here on just a regular Apple headset. Sometimes it's AirPods, but today it's the headset. I'm very passionate about that, lads. I don't know what you think.
Yeah. I'm also producing and co-hosting T-Bex podcast, Travel Matters, with Rick Calvert, and Rick's in close to Temecula, close to San Diego, and he's got a decent studio microphone from his rock band, and then I have my microphone here, and then we're on Zencaster where we bring in the guests, and they are on a wired headset. And Zencaster records all three lines, but I use the sound that Rick records into his Zoom and I record into my Zoom. And then I have a backup from Zencaster of our voices in case something. So I do have a backup in that case. But I'm using it for Lego. I'm using it for Travel Matters, and it works decently. But best thing is, of course, being face to face with somebody. It just brings better sound.
Ivo, anything on what to use? Anything else on what to use from a headset and microphone perspective there?
You just need to be able to hear yourself, and that's one of the most important things. I mean, people say, "Why do you sound so great on interviews?" Because I'm listening to myself. I mean, doing it like this feels weird. I don't know how am I too far away from the microphone now? I don't know what's happened here. And yeah, I am. So yeah, just be cognizant of the way that you sound, because it's not just your words people want to hear. It's how you say them. And that's important. So I think you need to know what's going on.
So when you can hear yourself, and look, it takes a little bit of getting used to. You'll need to try it out. Maybe have an interview with the dog or something, while you're getting used to the sound of your own voice. But hearing yourself, it's something that is not common on your Common or Garden software. They mute you. I can't hear myself here. They mute yourself naturally because it throws people off. So when you hear yourself, it does throw you off. But it allows you to get that control in. So I don't know if I'm too far from the microphone here versus here, so case in point. I'm going to jump on. Thanks, Andrew, for that question. Keep the questions coming in. We'll try and answer as many as we can. Live interviews. One for you, Palle, I suppose. But one of the things I noticed, and this is more of an administrative thing, it helps to have a well-written email ready to go. And this is nothing to do with audio, but just for getting interviews with somebody on the spot. It's like, how do I put somebody at ease? How do I get permission? Do I have the release to put them out on the internet after the recording is done? That kind of stuff. But to your point, and I think you picked up on it as well, the other thing I noticed over the last year is that when I have background noise, my recording quality, my interviews are just 200 times better. When I have studio conditions, I am editing for hours and hours and hours, and it just drives me crazy. So the higher the quality of the environment, the more control there is. If I'm in a sound booth or whatever else, I'm hearing the other microphone leaking onto the other person leaking onto the microphone. Everything's going wrong. I just think recording cafe style with a kind of a background din is just easier for me. And then the email with everything ready to go is another little hack that I've picked up. Who am I? What are we doing? The kind of questions we're talking about. Will you let me publish it afterwards? Blah, blah, blah. There's kind of a couple of boilerplate things in there. That really, really helps. Any other tips for getting somebody ready for interview? I suppose back to Andrew's point as well. How can you be a good guest, and how can you help somebody be a good guest?
In my case, when I have somebody in front of me and I feel that they are a little bit uneasy with being recorded and they want to sound great, and they get a little bit edgy, I tell them, listen, I do not have any gotcha questions unless I do, and I just want to make you sound great, and I try not to see it so much as an interview, see it more as a conversation between two friends who are passionate into traveling, because it's about traveling, or passionate into whatever it is that we're talking about. And then I say, if you say something that in the back of your mind sounds stupid, just tell me and we'll do it again, and I will edit and I'll make you sound great. I'll make you sound like a rock star. So that gets them to relax. I can almost see their shoulders literally going down. So that's one of the ways, but also just make them feel good and listen actively and respond to look them in the eye and respond to what it is that they're saying, because then they feel, oh, he's looking really interested, so I must be good, and that makes them even better, if that makes sense.
Eva, would you go as far as sharing, feel free to pick up on what Palle was saying, but would you go as far as submitting the final edit for the review of the interviewer before it goes out? It's something that we've done in the past. It takes quite a while. It might take a couple of weeks before we get the okay, because they have to listen to an hour themselves. So where are they going to find the hour, this kind of thing? But what kind of process do you go through for final approval, just to get people comfortable in that situation? And like I said, feel free to pick up on anything Palle had there.
Yeah, generally speaking, most people don't care that you're interviewing, especially if it's in a situation to where this isn't politics. We're not asking gotcha questions, as Palle mentioned, where there's nothing we're going to do. Everything you said. And as Palle said, if you said something stupid, remember, most podcasts are not recorded live, or they certainly shouldn't be recorded live, so that you can go back and make corrections. So it should be a comfortable mix. And so, no, I really don't recommend. I've had a handful of clients who insist on letting their guests listen to the final mix before we actually publish it. So that's a process that typically takes a couple of weeks and has about a 10% success rate. Because most people, after the second week, an email goes out and say, "Did you listen?" "Oh no, it's fine. I didn't listen, but I trust you," which is usually the answer most people are going to give. In most podcast situations, there are plenty of exceptions to that rule, but by and large, if you have not set up the expectation that your guest gets final approval, then don't give them final approval. And again, that's not to be mean or rude or anything like that. It's you're just reproducing what they had to say.
Yeah, and still that happened to me. I had interviewed a good friend, and we had a good conversation, and then I spent 2 days editing, and it sounded great. And he listened to it, and he said, "It sounds great, but what I said there might get me into trouble with the FBI.
Good a reason as any to censor something, you know.
It's okay for me to tell you these kind of things in a bar, but not in a podcast. But you did. But I just wanted to be a good friend. But my first reaction was, I'm taking the whole episode down and just never putting it out because I was, oh my God, you could have told me. But I slept on it, and I woke up and spent an hour editing out the stuff that he wanted out, and he was happy and I was happy, and we can still have that drink in the bar the next time.
You know, there's one thing I want to chime into that, Palle, is that I've seen this happen as well. Many of the guests you're going to interview on your future podcast have never been interviewed before. They've never had their voice recorded, which means they've never listened to the way they sound to everyone else. They've only ever heard their voice as it happens through bone conduction into their head, which is quite different than it sounds to us. So more than once, I have had either my past interviews or I've had my clients' guests come back and say, the content's fine, but I sound terrible. I sound flat. That doesn't sound like my voice. What did you do? And so there's a problem. You run into situations where there's nothing wrong. There's one person on the planet that it sounds funny to, but everybody else, they don't know what you sound like in your head. So it's not really a problem.
How would you get around that, Eva? Would you just do a quick test recording to help them get over that hump themselves?
It's a really good question. You know, it's happened so infrequently, and that's one of the reasons why I just don't go back to give it to them, because I don't think there's an easy way to do that. I mean, again, if the person is listening with headphones on, like right now, I can't hear the way I sound like in my head because I have these turned up very loud so that I can hear what I really and truly sound like to the rest of the world. So to me, that's the only way to get over that, is just have them monitor themselves as they're recording.
I'm going to jump into something here just to talk about what happens once recordings are made. So we get them somewhere or somehow into a recorder, and then stuff happens. This is the flow that happens for the Travel Massive podcast. We'll get recordings from God knows where. I'll bring them into one place. I can edit them. For me, it's Audition. It could be anything. Audacity, whatever you're using. I'll make a finished interview file. I'll put a new bumper or intro outro on there that might need extra recording. It'll be packaged in GarageBand in our case, and then the MP3 file comes in. So that's the kind of flow we're using. I get a sense that that's a lot of work for most people, guys. Is that overly complicated? Is that something to just get over? Or are there some tools, some cute apps that we can use to get through that a little bit faster? The editing part, maybe not, but the whole packaging and organizing of things, is there any easy way around that, I wonder?
If anything, I would say your graph was a little simplistic. I mean, to me, there are a lot more steps that go into it, especially if you're producing something more like what Palle does when you're out in the field. I mean, you're assembling lots of content. The next thing you have to do is get back in the studio and listen to all of that and figure out what story it is you're trying to tell. It's much, much more complicated than that. And then once you understand that, finding all the good bits, we could be here for days talking about how that happens. But even in a simple standard interview-based podcast, it's a different process. I mean, there's paperwork, paper planning that takes place. There's then the editing and listening back and trying to clean the sound, and then going back and writing a good introductory comments, and then going and writing a good wrap-up segment, and then hang on for the outro. I need to mention where I'm going next week, and it's a lot. It is a lot. And one of the things that I see a lot of podcasters fail at is they try to produce a podcast the way a podcast is consumed. They start at the beginning and work all the way to the end. And I'm telling you, I do this for a living, and I never do that. Well, I have one show that I do that on, but everything else, it is all done kind of inside out. I'm building a sandwich. I'm not building, and that means, slice the bread, put the meat in, then the condiments, and close down. I don't say, okay, first bite needs to have bread, pickles, this, doesn't make any sense, right? So it is a much more complicated process than we probably make it out to be. I don't say that to scare anyone, but just understand that you can spend a lot of time making really great content.
Look, if there's an episode 3, I think we would, if we continue this again, if we ever did an episode 3 on how to start podcasting, I think there's a whole hour in that from the sound of things, Evo. Palle, I came across just while I was preparing today. I'm a big fan of Marco Arment. He's the guy that wrote Instapaper and Overcast. He's also the editor of Forecast, the kind of podcast production tool. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it's kind of a simple way of assembling kind of multi-chapter, multi-element podcasts without going into the kind of wave editor style. So it's like a list of what's on and off in an episode. I just wanted to mention that. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it sounds like you have a lot of work to do compared to what we do on our podcast. We'll take, the 1.5 hour block. We might edit out some of the stuff, some of the noise, some of the fluff, and get it down to maybe an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and then it gets packaged. But I'm still only really working on one thing. It sounds like you've got hundreds of things going on with your typical production. How long does it take from the moment you've said, that's enough, I have everything I need, to getting all the work done and getting it out? How much effort is that? Or is it a labor of love? I don't know.
I'm afraid to tell you, because people might be listening that they will say, okay, I don't want to start a podcast. Because once I've recorded a lot, and I used maybe not even 50% of what I'm recording so much all the time. And when I sit down and say, now I'm starting to go through the files until I have a 30-minute episode, it's at least 3 full working days doing one episode. And then I need to write the show notes and do the graphics and the pictures and the website and put it out. So that's the regular travel episodes where I have a lot of out and about. But then the interview episodes that I also put out, I can do that a lot faster. That's only around 1 day.
It's still a lot of energy for something.
It is. That's where the passion comes in.
That's it. But I picked up immediately on that level of production quality. You're starting with the script from the sounds of things, and you're kind of filling it out, or you're feeling what the script might be from listening to the recordings that you've made. But there's that kind of maybe a bit of back and forth at that point. But it is a lot of energy to go in. It's not just like Eva said, starting at the beginning and waiting until you've gotten to the end and that's the edit done. It's there is a lot of work on planning that needs to happen before you can actually get the episode together.
Well, and to that point, the show that I do 4 days a week called Podcast Pontifications, it is 10 minutes long. It is me and a monologue. I plan for about 30 minutes, kind of the flow I want to take the conversation in, and then I sit down, and it literally takes me 10 minutes to record the show because it's just my stream of conscious. I know exactly what I want to say. And it might take me an extra 2 minutes to edit, which is nothing more than a trim at the beginning and the end and dropping in a little bit of music segue. Okay, so that's it, right? No, that's not it. It's a 3.5 hour job to put this show together, because not only once I've got the final MP3 file, then I have to do the transcript. Then I have to make the article that comes out of that. Then I have to write the social media updates that go along with it. Then I have to make sure that it's distributed in all the various places. It's my day when I'm doing the show begins at 6:30 in the morning. I start recording at 7 a.m. and by 9:30, I'm usually done. And then there's also time where the video gets posted up around it too. So it's a lot of work. Did I mention a 10-minute show 4 times a week, 3.5 hours?
I'm going to jump in on a couple of points you've raised there for both of you, actually. And Eva, I know your recent episode was talking about where the format is going and where it's been in the past, and it's actually an interesting discussion. But we're doing this live anyway. This is going out on YouTube. It's video native. Should the typical, at least for the interview format, should we be looking at doing podcast with video in some way? Is YouTube a channel to put your podcast out on if it doesn't have video? Can you pick up on that maybe? And there's a couple of other things I do want to go through, but should video be part of the format? Meaning you've got something that's going out on YouTube with video and then the audio only version separately, or do you put the audio version out on YouTube where people can find it as well? Just get a couple of comments on that if you don't mind.
I put the audio version on YouTube through Libsyn, and I have a picture that is specific for that episode that I create, and that goes out as a video on YouTube and also on my Facebook page. So yeah, that's the way I use it. I'd like to do more video, but I'm not a YouTuber. I have a YouTube channel, but I have a face made for podcasts. So
My
I
take
don't know
on
if you're
that
fishing
is-
for compliments there, Palle, but I don't know.
my take is this. My take is this. Doing audio and video are two very different formats. And as long as you are an able-bodied, sighted, well able to hear person, I don't know very many people that decide to watch a movie and then go to the kitchen and just crank up the movie's volume really, really loud so they can listen in. Doesn't work that way. There are visual things you're going to pick up. And while, yes, I do think that YouTube is a fine place to distribute your audio-only content, you can do that. Making really good content and video is hard. And most podcasts that are interview-based is just two talking heads. Like the video's not helping. I get this is a live video we're doing right here, and that makes sense in a live context, but audio only, it doesn't make sense. I mean, there's no point in having the heads of just so people looking at each other and talking. If you look at the popular YouTube channels that are combination video as well as audio, you will find that their video is usually 2 or 3 camera switched back and forth setup, and that's hard to do. Look, it's hard enough to make really good audio. So I would suggest decide what you want to be good at. Do you want to make great audio, or do you want to make really great video, and do that? And understand that there might be some crossover. But if you're thinking, oh, I'll just strip the audio out and make that my podcast for my video, you're going to have a crappy podcast.
So I think the consensus there is that if YouTube is used, it's really just a still frame, and the podcast goes in there, and YouTube lives in the browser, hidden away in another tab that's playing away while somebody's off doing something else. Kind of it's just a different type of player. Just out of curiosity, guys, what kind of numbers as a percentage of your downloads or your plays? It's hard to mix the stats. Happens between YouTube and the visual platforms and the audio platforms? Is it 10%? Is it 30%? What's the channel? What's the pickup on YouTube like?
You are a digit too many, my friend. It will be single digit, and in fact, oftentimes there'll be a decimal in front of that digit. But here's the thing to remember: when we're counting video views, whether it's YouTube or Facebook, video views are fake. They're made up. As long as, they really are. The view number means someone listened for more than 3 seconds.
Yeah.
No, more than 3 seconds. And so there is a rule that I tell people, look, if you're making talking head video stuff, that's not really compelling video. If you're making just 2 people talking to each other or a single camera on you, and you're not a famous YouTuber and you're just a regular human being, if you do that, you will get what I call the 90-10 rule. And that is that 90% of your views will have stopped watching within the first 10% of your video. And that's not me just making up a number. If you have access to your YouTube channel, go look. Don't just look at your view count. That's a made up number. Go look at your retention, and you will see that by the time that 10% of your audio your video has been consumed, you will have lost 90% of your audience. Always happens that way.
Palle, anything on that? Anything else?
No,
I've got,
I publish to as many platforms as possible. Just if somebody wants to consume audio that way, I don't personally do it myself. Then, by all means, I want to be there as well. So that's why I'm doing it.
It's something that came up as a question there, and I've got my own checklist here. It's the checklist that we use here on the Travel Massive podcast. There's a couple of things that you generally need to get together, and we did touch on that a little bit. It does take organization. You don't start at the beginning, just hope you get through to the end. There is a little bit of meta, around the task, as you were talking about there, Ivo. There's a lot of work that isn't just the 10 minutes that you're putting out. So for us, there's like a stack of stuff that we get ready every time we do a quick publish. What's missing from that list? What could we add on? What are the checklist items that we commonly need to think about before we hit go and we're done with an episode?
So I would say a few things. So one is you've got that album artwork. Actually, you should create episode-specific artwork.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Every episode should have its own specific individualized piece of art, not just the standard album artwork, because the album artwork is already there. It's associated with the show. A title and a subtitle and what you call show notes. I really hate that word. Episode details is a much better way of saying that, are things that help people consume, read along as they are listening to your content, and that's good. My show notes, my episode details that we write for clients are pretty extensive. Say 500 or 600 words is a pretty standard number, with all the links and credits and lots of different things, so that anybody who's listening can say, I want more information, click through and get more of that particular information. But then that's all goes in the app. Then you have the full article, which goes on the podcast's web page for that individual episode. And that's not, it should not be just a regurgitation of your episode details, because that was designed for in-app listening. The article, the blog post, if you will, is designed more to attract an audience. And in my case, I write about 1,500 words. And it's okay to me if someone doesn't even listen to the audio because they get it all in a written format. That should be okay. I want them to consume my content. I also produce a transcript, an actual transcript for everything, which makes it good and accessible. So for people who have hearing loss, it's extreme hearing loss, and can just read the content, I do make the transcripts available for them as well as embed the player on the blog post, and then writing all the social content. And as you said, we could talk for hours on the right way to publish, but it's a process, and it does take organization. Yeah, a lot more than 10 minutes.
On that note, is there a lot of work to? I think the transcript is good for SEO as well. You know, once Google can actually listen to podcasts, I think that'll be a great thing for indexing. But at the moment, it doesn't really. The services that do automatic transcriptions, are they worth their weight at all? Because I get the sense that you can get a little bit out of the machine, but not very much.
Well, you can get about 95-ish or so % out of a machine, which sounds like a lot, but that means there's a lot of mistakes, right? It means for every 95 words, 5 are going to be wrong. And so, yeah, but I think a machine transcription is a great place to start. And in fact, it's what I use. I mean, because I've got the full written article on top, I put the transcription. And if it's got things screwy, I kind of leave it alone. Should I go back and make it better? I should. There are plenty of human curated services. They're not very expensive. They're around $1 a minute, and you can get your transcript done. One thing I do want to point out, transcripts are not for SEO. Transcripts are not for SEO. Transcripts are for people who have hearing loss. There are plenty of things you should do to your website to make it search friendly, and having a transcript might be, as a secondary or tertiary benefit, give some SEO juice. But the primary reason a transcript exists is so that you have good accessibility for people. So never ever forget that, and never think that a transcript in and of itself is going to substitute for good quality search engine friendliness that your website has made. Second thing, Google does listen to podcasts. The Google Podcasts algorithm is actually listening and is pulling content out. You will find search results based off of contents that were uttered in speech only, that were not part of the transcript, that were not part of the actual article. Google is actually doing that. Just getting started. We are in the very early stages of that. That will continue. That doesn't preclude doing good SEO stuff. Don't be lazy. Still make a good blog, right? Travel bloggers, right? You know, all this stuff about making good travel blogs. Same thing applies when you're making your web page for each of your podcast episodes.
I'm going to jump into my last slide here. It's the last thing I learned about, and Rick Gazarian was great at kicking my butt on this one. We used to host, and I think it was fine. Technically, it was adequate. We hosted our podcast on SoundCloud for a long time. We've since moved to Libsyn after quite an extensive research, and I'll include that in the notes when they go out. But I think we've kind of dusted on this a couple of times, and I do want to pull out 1 or 2 points on it, if that's okay with you both. But we have, working backwards, a podcast is a file that's sitting on a device, whether it's in a web browser or it's in a mobile phone. However it's hidden from you, it's still a file that's downloaded. Ivo, I think you stressed that in the first part of this series. It gets played, and sometimes we might know that it gets played. Spotify might share the stats with us, and we get some of that through Spotify ourselves. Apple is starting to do it. I don't know what they're doing, but working back up the chain, the file is downloaded, and that's where the stats end generally. You get the file getting downloaded. That's the kind of universal metric. What is the number of downloads you get for a podcast, which is okay. The user might subscribe to it. We get a certain amount of data there, maybe. You've got the directories that pick it up, and there's quite a lot of those. But working back up the chain a little bit more, when you hit publish, you're putting it into an RSS feed. And this is how we used to do news publication back, it's going back about 15 years ago now. This is how people used to get their daily news. Some of us would get it in a news feeder, and that was through RSS. That's what podcasts go out on. They look a little bit like this. That's what the Travel Massive one looks like. It's not pretty, but you can see if you study it a little bit closely that there's quite a lot going on there. Those are all of our show notes. I know there's some critique to have there, Evo, but it's how we do them at least. We've got the MP3 file there. But that's it. That's pretty much it. And you've gone into emphatically host. Just put it on a podcast host. Doesn't matter which. Pick the font. It doesn't matter. Put it on a podcast host. It doesn't matter which one. But a company that knows what they're doing. They're not that expensive. There's probably some version of it that is kind of free or pseudo-free or, just a couple of bucks a coffee a month kind of stuff. But, it's not that expensive. Then you, at the top of the food chain, you hit publish. And it goes into that feed and it goes down the chain. What I was surprised by in this, and I thought Libsyn magically handled this, but an afternoon went on registering all of the feeds with all of the services. Now, some of them pick up from the Apple podcast directory, which is a joy. Some of them pick up from there. I found that out forensically, that, Overcast, Castro, those guys, they kind of come from the Apple RSS feed. So once Apple has it, then it'll end up in most channels. Spotify was a big manual event. TuneIn, iHeartRadio, these are kind of non-typical podcast channels anyway, but Deezer, again, non-typical podcast channel. But all of those were manual registrations. They took steps. Sometimes it was a multi-day affair where you register and then a couple of days later you get something verified and then maybe they listen. I don't know what they do, but it takes a couple of days. There's a lot going on there. I mean, I'm hoping there's a chapter in your book, Evo, that says these are the 20 things you need to do, because this was the biggest surprise I had. I thought there was fairy dust and unicorns magically working on this in Libsyn for me, but no, it's an afternoon. You need to plan an afternoon of submitting it to all of these services, and wow, something I'd rather not have had to do. But is there an easy way through this? Is there a service or a magical helper monkey that can do this for you for a fee and just take care of it all, or do you have to just lose the afternoon?
I mean, probably. We do this as part of the service for all the clients that we do. Obviously, the ones you have listed there and quite a few others. One of the challenges is always making sure that, as Palle said, look, when an episode is published, I want to make sure it's everywhere somebody could possibly listen, whether it's my show or my client's show. So if they're using a brand new service that it came up yesterday and I find out about it, it's worth it to me to submit my RSS feed or do whatever else is necessary to get it over there. There are a few different places that keep a good list. The one that I like is a service called podnews.net, which every podcaster should listen to, podnews.net. And James Cridland is the editor of the site, and he maintains a list of all the places you should submit your podcast. So rather than maintaining your own list, podcaster, what I suggest you do is when you launch a new show, just go see what James has to say. Just go see what is on the list of where you should submit to, and that's what you do.
How long has Libsyn been around? It seems to be
2004.
It's been around since
the beginning of podcasting, almost. They were the first official podcast hosting company that came out back in 2004, and that's how long I've been a Libsyn customer. Crazy.
I can't. I'm going to publish the criteria we used here. It'll be in the notes that go out. But we had we did a search. How do we do this? Who do we host on? It was a bit of a job. Like I didn't know. I literally hadn't a clue. I wish somebody just said, "Bang, it's Libsyn, shut up," and I'd gotten on with my life. Because there's so many, there's only so much that they do. really. They publish. They've got a podcast page feature. There's they maintain the RSS. You put up art in and substitute. So we made a list of the things that we needed, and they all boil down to the same kind of thing for all of them. It nearly boiled down to the font of the service itself. Like it felt so trivial, but how often do they come and go? I mean, it's been Libsyn since forever. I see Transistor was on our list. SoundCloud is there. That seems like it's been around for a while as well. Is there churn? Do these platforms vanish after a while?
The free ones tend to vanish pretty quickly because, it's relatively cheap to host audio files or host any media file, and because bandwidth continues to drop and storage, the cost of storage continues to drop. So companies will come and go and say, hey, I think we can offer free hosting and here's how we're going to pay for it. And they tend to not. So one of the things I look for when I'm recommending services to clients is pick someone that has either been around for a while, and that's what Libsyn has to bring to bear, and also is financially stable, which again, Libsyn brings to bear. But there are lots of other companies that are out there. And as you say, they all do basically the same thing. To me, it's like this. Who should be the best hosting company for your website? Should you use DreamHost? Should you use One-to-One Web? Should you use whatever else? And every travel blogger knows they're all the same until they're not. And it's kind of the same thing here. Yeah, you can go and get a show listed on a free podcast hosting company. May not be there tomorrow, but the one you're paying 10, 15, 20 bucks to is probably financially sound. It may not be, but here's the good news. Let's say that you get an email from your podcast hosting company that says, we're going out of business in 30 days. All you need to do is take your RSS feed to another company, and it'll automatically suck everything it needs to be in. Transferring hosting companies is a breeze. It is really, really, really simple to move your podcast from one podcast hosting company to another. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. But again, pick somebody who is reliable and stable, and is probably a good idea.
Is there anything that we need to worry about from you'd have to spend that afternoon I'm talking about again once you move host, right? Once you've
No, you don't. No, because your RSS feed is the RSS feed, and as long as you can do some tricky stuff called a 301 redirect, which is we're not going to get into that. No, your listeners will never know that you moved. Your listeners should never, ever, ever know that you moved hosting companies if you do it right, and there's no reason to not do it right.
I want to wrap up. We're coming up to the time is up, lads, and I don't want to have to promise a third version of this show. We've gone into a lot of detail. We started with mics. We've talked about hosting again, and I know both of those topics could end up being a whole channel. When you think about it, there's quite a lot to cover. So I think we've gone through some of the basics that everybody needs to know that are a little bit more advanced for folks that are interested in getting going. I think one of the comments that stood out from before Evo was start recording. When we were backstage, it was one of the comments that stood out for me from you. Start recording and then figure out whether or not to take the next step. It was one of the comments that I think we should reinforce. There is quite a lot of tech there to do. There is help from folks like yourselves when you need it. And there's quite a lot of YouTube channels and guides to help people going once they've got the right question. But I think recording, shoot first or record first and ask questions later is my takeaway from that. We've presented this as my 8 things I wish I knew before I started into the podcasting world with the Travel Massive stuff. What is the one thing you wish you knew, or you wish everybody knew before they started? And I'll leave that question open to both of you. Evo, because I'll let Palle have the last word. What is the one thing you wish you knew before you started, or was the one thing that you wish other people knew because you've been at it for so long?
Yeah, I'll do the second part because no one knew anything in 2004. We were inventing this medium. It was a lot of fun. But I think there are a lot of myths that propagate and have propagated since the beginning of this. And I guess the one I'm going to probably focus on is doing things right, doing things that sound good, doing things that make something that when you can make something you are proud of, it's going to take more time than you think. That shouldn't scare you away. That should only if you think I just want to do a quick half-ass job on something, and I want you to be scared away if that's your instinct. But if you want to do something that is worth people listening to, it's going to take more time than you think. Not necessarily more time than you have. Palle and I are definite examples here of how you can certainly make things that sound good and invest a lot of time in it, and we think it's worthwhile. But yeah, just know that it's probably going to take a little longer than you think.
I'd have to agree with that. I was surprised by that. Palle, what's the one thing you wish everybody knew, or the one thing you wish you knew?
Yeah, going back to the hosting thing, I thought, not coming from the technical side, I thought that I have a WordPress blog and I just find a plugin and then host the media files on my WordPress blog. And I actually did that. And as soon as I started having a few downloads, episodes were cut in half and some didn't play. And I thought, what is going on? And then I spoke to somebody smart that said, oh, you should always have a hosting company. So I really would like to have known that. One thing I would like to recommend, if you are doing a travel podcast and recording out in the streets or out where there's other sounds, make sure that you record 30 to 60 seconds of just the environment sound. Because that's really, really helpful for when you're editing. You might want to put in a pause. You might want to, you can do stuff with that. So that's something I tell myself, but I forget a lot of the times. Also, I forget all the time to take a photo of the people that I'm interviewing because that looks so good on my blog when I have the photo. That happened so many times that I forgot to take a photo. So the clean sound, the environment sound, and the photo, and then get a hosting company. That's.
I think you forgot to take a picture of us together the 2 times I've been on your podcast.
I did.
Gentlemen, I know I'd fill another 90 minutes with you, but thank you so much for joining us again today. Hopefully we've torn down the barriers to helping our own community of content creators to move to audio. I think it's a great format. I think it's a really exciting time for it. But just for the meantime, you know where to find us here. We're on the Travel Massive podcast. Go subscribe to that. Ivo, what subscription should people make to hear more from you?
Go to podcastpontifications.com. It is a show that is all about making content you can be proud of. It's about the future of audio. We don't tell you what to do. We tell you things you should be thinking about. And I'm all over the Twitters at Evo Terra.
Very good, Ivo. And Palle, how do we find more about what you're up to?
Yeah, well, the thing is that if you only search for Radio Vagabond, you get the Danish version. So unless you want the Danish version, make sure that you search for the Radio Vagabond. It's a little bit of a hassle. And then I also just want to mention another podcast, Travel Matters, that I produce and co-host with Rick and Kevin. Hope to see you at TBEC soon if we're getting back out there in the world, and we'll do a part 2 over there on Travel Matters. So
I'm looking forward to breaking out of these 4 corners here and doing the in real life interviews again. It's great to have the studio control.
I've been thinking, what is behind that curtain?
You wouldn't believe. It's like it's like a drone strike behind me there. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining us again. You've been very generous with your time, folks. That's 3 subscriptions you need to make. And of course, if you found this on the recorded version, thank you for joining us live, of course. But if you found the recorded version, there is a part 1. This is part 2. Make sure you share it if you found it in any way useful. Again, guys, thank you so much for joining us and for being part of something massive. Thank you.
Thanks, Kev.
Thank you.